Hey guys, tonight we're going back, way back, to the frosty edge of the known world. You're trudging through knee-deep snow, beneath a pewter sky, the wind slicing at your cheeks like a whetted blade. A thatched roof longhouse squats ahead, half buried in frost, smoke curling lazily from its central chimney hole. Welcome to winter in a Viking village. Before you drift off, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It really helps me create more great content for you. Only if you're enjoying what I do, of course, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. By the way, what time is it where you are, and where in the world are you watching from? Let's make this peaceful space even better together. Now relax, and let's begin. You probably won't survive this. It's not the raids or the cold that'll get you. It's the menu, because tonight we're exploring what Vikings really ate to get through the coldest months of the year. And let's just say, if you're craving warm pastries and rich broths, you may want to lower those expectations. Think dried fish, goat's milk, gone tangy, and bread. You might confuse for a roofing tile. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the longhouse, and the air immediately changes from biting cold to a dense wood smoke warmed stillness. Your nose twitches. It's not quite comforting. There's an unmistakable tang of old fish. You blink through the gloom and spot it. Strips of cod and herring dangling from beams, cured with smoke and wind, seasoned by months of patient ignoring. These are stockfish, and they'll be your new best friend. For the next several months, Vikings didn't have fridges. Obviously, what they did have was ingenuity and salt. Mountains of salt, salted and dried fish caught in bulk, during the warmer seasons were strung up or buried in snowbanks and pulled out one chewy piece at a time. It's said you had to soak some pieces for a day just to make them chewable. But even then, your jaw got more of a workout than your stomach did. Still preserved, fish was a winter lifeline. Herring, salmon, cod. These fish swam not just in fjords, but in the veins of the Viking diet. You'd eat them roasted, boiled, or if supplies were low, just gnawed on cold while huddled under a bearskin. Sometimes they were so dry they sparked like flint when you bit into them. Historians still argue whether the Viking use of preservation was driven more by necessity or by culinary tradition. Some claim it was an art form passed down through generations. Others think it was just what you did when your entire pantry was a snowbank and your kitchen tools consisted of a knife, a pot, and whatever you could dry on a stick. Nearby, a man thumps a sack onto the floor. It's full of fish heads. You watch as he sets them by the hearth. No part of the catch was wasted. Heads were stewed bones boiled, and fish skins once crisped were like Viking potato chips, except sharper and less fun. And if you were really lucky, you got lutefisk. Picture this: dried whitefish, rehydrated in water, then soaked in lye. Yes, the caustic chemical. Then rinsed until it was edible by some loose medieval definition. It ends up jiggly, translucent, and unnervingly neutral in flavor. Kind of like seafood-flavored jelly wearing a ghost costume. There's also the salted lamb, which will make more of a cameo later. But just know that meat, especially fresh, was rare in the cold season. unless something died of natural causes, or you had a serious party planned. You walk past the hearth and peer into the food cache baskets of dried peas, hazelnuts, and bitter apples, so wrinkled they look more like curses than fruit. None of this is glamorous, but it worked. People lived, farmed, sailed, and raided on this diet. You sit beside a woman turning a hunk of fish over the coals she's humming. Her hair smells of wood smoke and ash. She offers you a bit of fish on a splintered plank. It's smoky, tough, but there's salt and fire in it, and after a day of chopping ice or hauling nets, you'd call it a feast. You lean back, belly half full of what your stomach hasn't yet decided to reject, and watch shadows flicker across the walls. You're alive. You're warm. And even if the food's a bit chewy, it means you've made it one more night on the edge of the world. You wake up, with your cheek pressed to a straw mat, the fire long since faded to embers. Outside, the wind howls like a hungry god, but inside the longhouse, a soft clatter draws you to the central hearth. A wooden ladle stirs in a clay pot, and the scent wafting up is tangy creamy, almost alive. Welcome to breakfast goat's milk and sour porridge. Vikings didn't just rely on fish to get through winter. They leaned heavily on their livestock. If the goats hadn't frozen, wandered off, or become stew, they were still providing milk. And milk in the absence of refrigeration didn't stay milk for long. It curdled, it soured, it thickened into clumps. And that's exactly how they liked it. You sip from a wooden cup, filled with sur mjölk, a Viking version of sour milk or yogurt. It's oddly satisfying, with a tang like plain kefir, and the same unsettling mouthfeel as drinking something that might fight back. Still, it's protein, it's calories. And if you're lucky, there's a thin skin of cream on top, almost sweet. And that counts as dessert. Alongside it, there's porridge, barley, or oats, boiled down to a thick pasty mush, sometimes mixed with milk, sometimes just water and salt. What elevates it? Nothing really. But on a cold winter morning, it fills your belly and warms your insides just enough to feel less like you're about to become a frost statue. Historians still argue whether Viking dairy practices were borrowed from neighboring cultures or developed independently in the harsh Nordic environment. Some point to early fermentation techniques, possibly introduced through trade with the Slavs or Celts. Others believe the climate itself shaped the dairy habits. Sour milk naturally emerged, so it was embraced. You eye a round lump of what looks like wax on the table. It's Meisinger, a cheese byproduct, something between a byproduct of whey and punishment. Dense, waxy, and sour beyond belief. But people ate it. Probably, while squinting and trying to think of anything else. The house matriarch ladles out warm, sour milk into little wooden bowls, setting each beside a chunk of cold porridge from the night before. Meals were often eaten cold in the morning to conserve firewood and effort. You eat slowly, chewing the same bite for minutes. It tastes like commitment. Then comes the highlight. Smør, Viking butter. If you were lucky or high status, you might have a tiny knob of it to melt into your porridge. Salty, creamy, made by hand, and churned from the goat's milk of animals you knew by name. You glance around the room. Children are licking their wooden bowls. Goats are bleating outside the door. And a dog with frost on its whiskers eyes your leftover porridge. You slide it toward him. He deserves it more. Despite its sour profile, dairy was vital. It allowed the Vikings to stretch calories and nutrition when meat was scarce and vegetables were more memory than reality. The milk could be drunk, curdled, churned, or stored as cheese for leaner times. Some records even suggest they fermented it into mild alcoholic beverages, though modern reenactors have mostly decided that was a terrible idea. Still, dairy wasn't for everyone. Some archaeologists argue that Viking populations had varying levels of lactose tolerance, perhaps suggesting that dairy was more common among certain clans or regions than others. That might explain the strange silence from some longhouses when the word milk was mentioned. Back by the hearth, a child brings you a lump wrapped in birch bark. You unwrap it to find a smoky cheese studded with mysterious flecks. Ash, maybe, or herbs, or something that used to be alive. You take a bite. It tastes complex and slightly regretful. As you chew, you look out the slit window and spot a goat staring at you through the frost. She blinks, then walks off, unimpressed. You raise your cheese in tribute. Later, when the wind calms you, join the villagers outside to check the food cellars dug into the ground. Here, buried beneath layers of snow and hay, are clay pots of curdled milk, waiting patiently for their moment. Some have frozen solid. Some have taken on new colors. All of them, apparently, are edible. Technically, you wonder if the sour porridge will return for dinner. It probably will. You sigh. But for now, you're fed. You're upright. And you've survived another Viking morning with your dignity mostly intact and your taste buds only mildly offended. Your stomach makes a noise that sounds like it's unsure whether to digest or revolt. Breakfast is settling or staging a quiet rebellion. But there's work to be done. You shuffle across the longhouse floor and pass under a row of what looks like decorative shields nailed to the rafters. But they're not shields. They're bread. Viking bread. It turns out wasn't quite the fluffy golden loaf you might dream of. It was thin, round, flat, and hard as a well-thrown axe. These flatbreads, made mostly of rye or barley, were baked in late summer or early autumn, then dried until they resembled discs of edible sandstone. People would literally hang them from the rafters to keep them safe from rat's mold and overly enthusiastic children. You reach up and knock one gently with your knuckles. It rings. Some Vikings softened the bread by soaking it in broth or milk before eating. Others just gnawed through the toughness like a dental challenge from the gods. There's a story told by a local farmer, half myth, half complaint, about a man whose tooth cracked so loud during breakfast that the goats stampeded. You sit on a bench near the hearth as someone saws a flatbread in half with a knife, more suited to woodworking, crumbs spray, like gravel. The bread has a smoky scent from the fire, and it's laced with the familiar bitterness of rye, and just a hint of ground tree bark. Yes, bark. During especially poor harvests, Vikings added birch bark flour to stretch their grain supply, not for flavor, unless you're very, very generous, but because it filled the stomach. Historians still argue whether the addition of bark was common practice or limited to moments of extreme hardship. Some say it was a regional method passed down by forest-dwelling communities. Others argue it's a myth born from misinterpretations of ancient recipes. You chewing the barky edge of a bread tile feel like the truth lies somewhere in between, and that truth tastes like slightly sweetened sawdust. The flour itself was rarely refined, gritty coarse, sometimes containing fragments of stone from the grinding process. It gave Viking bread a signature crunch, not from crust, but from actual rock. Dental archaeologists have found heavy wear on Viking molars, likely from a lifetime of chewing these tiny geological hazards disguised as breakfast. A woman next to you hands over a slab of butter to smear on the bread. You nod gratefully, spreading it with your thumb. It melts, slowly, sinking into the bread's cratered surface, like rain in a dry riverbed. You take a bite. The butter helps a little. Next to the fire, a younger man toasts his bread by skewering it on a stick. It smolders briefly before catching fire. He laughs, drops it, stamps it out, then eats it anyway. You make a mental note not to let him cook anything else. Children pass through, grabbing hanging rounds like medieval frisbees and arguing over who got the least moldy one. There's a rhythm to this food, simple, repetitive, and stubborn, like the Vikings themselves. Bread might not have been glamorous, but it was always there, tough as nails, and nearly as sharp. At the far end of the room, you spot a rare treasure, a round of freshly baked barley bread, still soft and warm. It's for a visiting chieftain. You eye it with longing. The chieftain catches your gaze, smirks and tears off a piece to toss your way. It lands in your lap, steaming gently. You break it open, moist, nutty, almost sweet. A reminder of what bread can be before winter gets its hands on it. It's gone too soon, and you return to your trusty rafter biscuit. You chew slowly, rhythmically, your jaw setting into the pace of those who chew, not for pleasure, but for survival. And as your teeth grind over the second layer, you wonder if your ancestors had better bread, or just better dental insurance. You've barely swallowed the last bite of bread when someone hands you a cup. It's filled with a cloudy amber liquid that smells faintly of yeast and yesterday's socks. You sniff it cautiously. The man across from you grins and raises his own mug in salute. You drink its beer, but not like anything you've had before. Viking ale was weak by modern standards, barely alcoholic, slightly sour, and often served warm or at room temperature. It wasn't brewed for pleasure exactly. It was brewed because the water wasn't safe to drink. This was survival in a cup, and toddlers drank it too. Congratulations, you've joined the tiniest beer club in history. Brewed from barley water and wild yeast, plus whatever herbs or local weeds they thought might help. Viking beer was consumed daily. It was often cloudy, gritty, and occasionally bitter, depending on what got tossed into the cauldron. Hops weren't widely used yet, so instead they flavored their brews with juniper yarrow or even bog myrtle. Yes, an herb that sounds like it was discovered by accident in a swamp. You sip again. It's earthy, mildly sweet, and oddly refreshing, like a grain smoothie that decided to party just a little. Historians still argue whether Viking brewing was mostly done by women or men. Some say it was part of a housewife's regular chores, alongside milking goats and yelling at children not to eat the fish heads too early. Others believe there were specialized brewers who developed techniques passed down within families. Either way, ale wasn't a luxury, it was a daily essential. Across the room, a child tips back his mug of ale and wipes his mouth with a grin, then dives back into a game involving a goat and what appears to be a stick tied to a dead fish. The goat wins. You sit by the hearth and watch a woman strain another batch of brew through a cloth bag stuffed with straw and herbs. The smell is pungent, but oddly comforting, like old bread and warm wood. She ladles a bit into another cup and hands it to a visiting merchant who toasts her with a smile full of missing teeth. Beer wasn't just a drink. It was currency medicine, hospitality. You welcomed guests with ale. You honored the gods with ale. You tried to forget winter with ale. And if the fermentation went sideways, Well, you drank it anyway and blamed the spirits. In the far corner of the longhouse, you spot a sealed barrel carved with runes. Someone explains it's Mjud, mead, made from fermented honey. Now that was the good stuff, but rare honey was difficult to find in the Nordic world, and a beehive raid in summer was a serious operation, often resulting in stings, shouting, and sweet victory. You're offered a thimble of the golden liquid. It glows in the firelight. You sip. It's warm, heady, and much stronger than the ale. This isn't for everyday drinking. This is for ceremonies, sacrifices, and making bold declarations about sea monsters or marriage. A joke floats around the table. Drink enough mead, and you'll think your fish stew is a banquet. You chuckle softly. The line hits a little too close. As you rest your cup, someone begins to sing a low rhythmic chant in Old Norse. It's a drinking song, possibly also a prayer, though no one seems quite sure. The children start clapping along the fire, flickers brighter, and the longhouse glows with the soft cheer that only ale and shared hardship can bring. You lean back, belly warm, head light. Around you, mugs clink, jokes fly, and a goat tries to eat someone's tunic. Yes, Viking beer might be muddy and mild, but in this world of wind and stone, it's also comfort. It's company. It's a reason to sit together and tell stories, even if the stories are mostly about whose goat ate whose fish, and if your ale happens to be laced with juniper and optimism tonight, well, that's more than enough. The air outside has gone brittle with cold, sharp enough to make your nostrils sting. Yet here you are wrapped in a fur cloak, trudging along behind a hunched figure holding a woven basket and a crooked stick. You're not headed to a market or a neighbor's fire. You're going foraging. In winter, you might wonder what exactly there is to find when everything is either dead, buried under snow, or pretending to be dead to avoid being found. But the Vikings were resourceful. When food ran low, and it always did in winter, they went scavenging for whatever the forest could offer. Today's menu: moss, lichen, and bark. The woman ahead of you, tough wrinkled eyes like stone, kneels beside a patch of gray-green fuzz clinging to a tree trunk. She scrapes it gently with a knife, collecting the lichen in her basket. It'll be boiled into stew, or dried and ground into powder, not for flavor, but for bulk. One particular lichen, Iceland moss, was prized, high in carbs. It could be soaked, boiled, and added to porridge to make it slightly less tragic. But it came with a caveat: it needed proper preparation. Otherwise, it was bitter and mildly toxic. That was part of the Viking diet's charm. Eat wrong, and dinner might fight back. Historians still argue whether bark and moss were desperation foods or commonly integrated into seasonal cuisine. Some believe bark flour was a survival trick only used in famine years. Others point out archaeological evidence of birch and pine being regularly processed and added to meals, suggesting the line between innovation and necessity was blurry at best. You reach a fallen pine and watch as a boy scrapes the inner bark, the soft layer between wood and outer rind. This is the good stuff, cambium. It's bitter and stringy, but it can be boiled dried and ground into a flour substitute. Mixed with porridge, it adds bulk and the flavor. Let's call it resinous surprise. Later back at the longhouse, a steaming pot bubbles gently. You peer in. Floating within are dark green strands, thin bark shreds, and a few peas, trying their best to stay relevant. Someone adds a ladle of milk and a pinch of salt. The smell is earthy, like soup, cooked in a wooden boot, but strangely satisfying. A young girl offers you a spoonful. You blow, gently taste it. It's warm, chewy, slightly bitter, but filling, and that's what matters. Vikings didn't forage for luxury. They foraged because winter doesn't care if you're tired of eating tree. If it grew, didn't bite back, and wasn't glowing, it went in the pot. Occasionally, they'd find wild onions, garlic, or roots that hadn't frozen through. These were rare treats, and people would talk for days about spotting a green sprig poking out from the snow. You once overheard a man say he saw a whole carrot, and everyone gasped like he'd found Thor's hammer. You finish your bowl and set it aside. A man nearby starts grinding dried moss with a stone pestle, muttering to himself. His hands are cracked from the cold, his sleeves stiff with salt, but his movements are patient, practiced. This is how you make winter survivable, one spoonful of bark-laced moss stew at a time. You remember a joke someone told earlier? If it grows on a rock and tastes like despair, we've probably eaten it. Everyone laughed. Then they went back for seconds. You settle back near the fire, full enough to feel it. Your breath fogs gently in the air. Outside, snow keeps falling. But inside, there's warmth food of a kind, and the stubborn determination of people who refuse to let a little thing, like an unforgiving climate, stop them from sitting down to dinner. The fire crackles louder tonight. You're starting to suspect that's not entirely a good thing, because something just hit the pot with a splat. A particularly bold boy pokes at it with a stick, and a chunk of meat floats to the surface, glistening and vaguely eye-shaped. It's a sheep's head boiled. Welcome to one of the more memorable delicacies of Viking winter cuisine, civid, or preserved lamb's head. If you were hoping for something less intense this evening, say a nice salad or a piece of toast, you may need to recalibrate. The process is straightforward. Take the head of a sheep already cooked or cured. Singe off the hair slice. It in half, lengthwise, scoop out the brain, if you're fancy, and boil it for hours. What you're left with is a steaming bowl of cheeks, tongue, eyeballs, and jaw meat, all seasoned by nothing but salt smoke and inevitability. You're handed a wooden spoon and a half skull. The eyes stare up at you. You stare back. The staring contest ends with you taking a very small, very brave bite. Surprisingly, the cheek meat is tender, almost buttery. There's collagen. There's gelatin. There's a strange sense of pride creeping in. Historians still argue whether svid was a common household dish or reserved for ceremonial occasions. Some sources suggest it was part of ritual midwinter feasts. Others say it was just another way to ensure no part of the animal was wasted. Either way, if there was meat on the bone, someone was boiling it. Preservation methods varied. In some cases, the heads were buried in snow or ash, salted, or even fermented in sealed containers. That last one, a gamble. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it became more of a cautionary tale. Tonight's version is fresh as a decapitated, lightly smoked sheep's head can be. A woman next to you gleefully slurps the eyeball from her half and grins at you with the satisfaction of someone who knows every part of the animal has its purpose, even the socket jelly. For the Vikings, meat was precious. Animals were often slaughtered in the autumn when fodder grew scarce. What couldn't be eaten fresh was cured, smoked, or buried. But during long, icy months, the fresh stuff ran out fast. That's where the odds and ends came in. Organs, feet, tails, heads, all of it went into stews, or was boiled solo for maximum yield. And while sheep were a staple, they weren't the only animals on the table. Pigs were rare, but treasured cows. When slaughtered, were feasted on like royalty. Horses, controversially, were sometimes eaten, though it depended on era, region, and religious influence. After Christianity spread, horse eating was frowned upon, sometimes even outlawed. You pause, spoon, hovering over a now silent eye cavity. A young girl dips bread into the broth and hums a happy tune. It's surprisingly peaceful. Like all of this is perfectly normal. And here it is. The bones are collected in a wooden bucket for later use, likely broth. Nothing gets thrown away. Even the tongue, which has a chewy richness to it, is shared around, like treasure. You decline seconds, but accept a ladle of the broth, salty, fatty, smoky. It tastes like a barn in winter, but comforting too. A man at the end of the bench tells a story about a feast where they served pickled ram's testicles. You nod politely and try very hard to focus on the broth. Eventually, the heads are stripped clean. The skulls will be set aside for tools offerings or possibly turned into decorative ladles. You can't tell if that's charming or horrifying. Probably both. Outside, the wind moans through the cracks in the walls. But inside the longhouse is full of warmth, laughter, and people gnawing on jawbones, like it's the best part of the year. And maybe it is, because in a world where winter wants you gone any meal, no matter how strange is a small defiance, a stubborn reminder that the Vikings didn't just endure, they chewed back. You finish your broth, set down your spoon, and sigh. You're full, slightly haunted, but definitely full. You wake to the bubbling of a pot that's been simmering since before sunrise. The air inside the longhouse is heavy with steam and scent, rich, meaty, and unmistakably communal. It's stew again, but not just any stew. This is grotter, the Viking equivalent of everything soup. There's no recipe, just whatever's left that hasn't spoiled. You shuffle over and peer in. Peas float alongside something vaguely root-shaped. Is it a parsnip? A turnip? Possibly a carrot from last month that got lost in a corner and re-emerged victorious. Chunks of meat bob lazily in the broth. Some are definitely goat. Others are suspiciously unidentifiable. There's a spine in there, too. You decide not to ask questions. The communal cauldron was the beating heart of every Viking household during winter. Hung over the hearth, it never stopped cooking. New ingredients were added as they appeared. Old bones, dried fish, leftover milk, last night's porridge. Everything melded together in a constant bubbling stew that thickened over time and developed what generous people might call depth of flavor. You ladle some into a wooden bowl. It's steaming hot and smells like 5 different animals and 2 different decades. You take a sip. It's thick, savory, and surprisingly warming. Not bad. Actually, if you ignore the texture, the vague hints of smoke-soaked moss, and whatever that chewy bit was. Historians still argue whether this eternal stew method was a necessity born of poverty or an intentional culinary technique. Some point to similar practices in other ancient cultures, suggesting a shared human instinct for cooking what you have forever. Others believe it was simply the most efficient way to avoid dying with a full pantry. You glance around the longhouse. The stew pot is a magnet. Children drag themselves over for a sniff and a scoop. Elders poke in strange herbs and mutter about balance. A dog licks his chops beneath it, hoping for drips. Even the goats get excited when someone starts stirring. It's the centerpiece of daily life. One man adds a handful of dried mushrooms, small shriveled things gathered before the first snow. Another drops in crushed acorns, boiled thrice to leach out the bitterness. There's no taste testing. The pot has its own logic now. It decides what it will become. You recall a story told last night. A woman claimed her grandmother's stew. Pot hadn't been emptied in over 7 years. Tasted like history, she'd said with a smile. And socks? The broth coats your throat, leaving a pleasant warmth. Somewhere in the pot, you suspect yesterday's fish is having a polite argument with last week's lamb, but they seem to be getting along. Outside, the wind picks up again. Snow pelts the walls like 1,000 tiny fists. You draw your cloak tighter and sip slowly. This stew might not win any awards, but it carries you. One spoonful at a time. It says you're still here. You're still warm. You still have something to eat. Later, someone ladles the dregs into a smaller pot to save for tomorrow. The cauldron is wiped down with hay, then reloaded more bones, more peas, more dreams. The cycle begins again. It's not gourmet. It's not glamorous, but it's alive. It's a story told in ladles, a memory made edible. And tonight, when the wind howls and the roof groans, that stew will still be there, bubbling, waiting quietly, declaring victory over the cold. The storm breaks sometime before dawn, and with it comes an eerie hush. Snowflakes drift like ash across the landscape, and everything is muffled beneath their weight. You're outside now, breath clouding before you, following a trail of shouting and excitement toward the edge of the fjord. And there it is, a whale, or at least what's left of one. Beached in the night, its massive form lies sprawled across the ice-strewn shore, black glistening and steaming slightly in the morning sun. A small crowd has already gathered. Men and women with knives, buckets and wide eyes stand around like they've discovered treasure. Because in a way, they have. A beached whale was a rare and glorious accident. In a time where winter feasts were more imagination than reality, stumbling upon tons of edible meat was nothing short of divine intervention. It didn't happen often, but when it did, the entire village mobilized like bees on spilled honey. You approach warily. The whale's eye is half closed, and its mouth gapes slightly, revealing a cathedral of baleen. Someone's already climbed onto its back and begun carving blubber flies in chunks, steaming in the cold. You're handed a knife, you decline politely. The meat, dark, oily, rich, is quickly portioned and hauled off in sleds, baskets, and cloaks. Strips of blubber will be boiled down into oil, used for lamps, and maybe even cooking. The flesh will be dried, salted, or roasted on flat stones. And if you're truly daring, there's always fermented whale, but that's a culinary adventure for another lifetime. Historians still argue whether Vikings actively hunted whales or only scavenged the beached ones. The sagas mention harpoons and boats, but physical evidence is rare. Some believe they occasionally targeted smaller species near shore. Others claim they waited for nature to do the work. Either way, when a whale appeared, it was all hands on deck. A boy skips past you with a basket of tongue meat grinning. Nearby, a woman carefully slices out a strip of blubber the size of a canoe. Everyone's smiling, talking, planning meals in excited tones. Tonight, there will be stew, there will be roasting, there might even be singing. You help carry a slab of meat back to the longhouse, the warmth of it seeping into your hands through your gloves. It smells faintly of fish and iron, but also of abundance. Inside preparations begin immediately. Whale steak grilled on flat stones, blubber boiled with onions, broth so dark it looks like night in a bowl. You're offered a taste. You take it. It's intense. The texture is dense. The flavor, rich and fatty. But it fills you. Warms you, reminds you that sometimes winter gives back. Of course, not everyone eats whale. A few villagers shake their heads and retreat to the fire, mumbling about spirits or sea curses. Some say whales are sacred. Others just say they're too chewy. But for most, this is a gift, a feast, a lucky break from the usual routine of dried fish and bitter porridge. By nightfall, the air inside the longhouse is thick, with smoke laughter and the unmistakable scent of meat cooking over fire. Children sit cross-legged gnawing on greasy whale ribs. Elders sip broth with faraway looks in their eyes. And you recline beside the hearth belly, full of something that once swam in the deep. For one night winter feels a little less cruel. The longhouse is dim again, lit only by firelight, and the glow of a beeswax candle flickering near the carved godpost. You're sitting beside a heavy oak chest, fingers sticky from the last bite of whale blubber, when someone gently lifts the lid with a ceremonial air. Inside honey golden thick and shimmering like a hoarded treasure, because in Viking households, honey wasn't just a sweetener. It was sacred, rare, and never wasted. Every drop mattered. Tonight, it's not going into porridge or bread. It's being spooned into a carved horn cup and mixed with warm water and herbs. This is a special occasion. You're about to sip something ancient, rare, and possibly magical mead. You take the cup carefully. It's warm in your hands, and the scent is both floral and earthy, tinged with pine and iron from the horn. You sip slowly. The flavor is rich and strange fermented sweetness, with something bitter curling at the edge. It feels like drinking a toast to summer from the heart of winter. Historians still argue whether Vikings drank mead regularly or only on special occasions. Some sagas speak of mead halls flowing with it, while others suggest it was reserved for the elite, the chieftains, and the gods. Archaeological finds hint at both mead vessels turn up in graves, but most were small, too small for daily use, perhaps unless you had bees of your own. Beekeeping in the Viking world wasn't common, especially in the colder northern reaches. Hives needed careful tending, and honey production was modest, which made every batch precious. In some regions, honey had to be traded or raided, imported from more temperate lands, where flowers weren't buried under snow for half the year. You dip your finger into the chest and swipe a tiny taste of raw honey. It's thick, slightly gritty, and wildly sweet. Compared to everything else you've eaten lately, it tastes like sunlight itself. Next to you, an old woman smears a bit onto a flatbread, folds it, and hands it to a child with reverence. A feast wrapped in bark-hard rye. But honey wasn't just for food and drink. It was medicine, too, mixed with herbs. It treated wounds and coughs, rubbed into cracked lips, dabbed on burns. It also had spiritual weight. Offerings to the gods sometimes included honeycombs, and it was said that fallen warriors in Valhalla drank mead from the udders of a magical goat. A bit unhygienic, perhaps, but undeniably mythic. As the cup of mead passes around the fire, the mood shifts. People soften. Songs begin low, melodic chants about lost ships, summer fields, and the warmth of long-forgotten suns. You sip again, and the buzz of alcohol melts into the buzz of voices. Someone pulls out a tiny jar of honeycomb, carefully saved, still glistening. It's passed around like a jewel. You break off a corner, and the wax collapses between your teeth with a satisfying crunch. Sweetness floods your tongue. It's not just dessert, it's defiance. Here in a world of salted fish, sour milk, and bark porridge, a spoonful of honey is more than flavor. It's hope, it's memory, a promise that life once bloomed and will bloom again. You look around, the longhouse faces lit in flickering gold lips, sticky with sweetness, eyes shining with stories half remembered and songs half sung. The fire crackles, a child giggles, and for the first time in days, no one talks about tomorrow's meal. Tonight, it's enough just to sip to sing, and to let honey linger on the tongue, like a secret from summer, whispered into the heart of winter. The mead is gone. The fire is low, but the door creaks open again, and a blast of cold air brings with it the smell of travel, wet wool, and strong cheese. A guest has arrived, a trader judging by the worn cloak and the heavy satchel slung over one shoulder. Hospitality is sacred here. No matter the time or the state of your stew, a guest is fed. He bows, murmurs, greetings, and drops his offering on the table, a round wheel of goat cheese wrapped in cloth and smelling faintly of both promise and peril. You catch a whiff. It's sharp-aged and slightly judgmental. Vikings treasured visitors, not just for the stories they carried, but for the flavors. Trade routes stretched far, even in the winter, even across frozen rivers. And though long voyages were rare in the coldest months, some hardy souls moved between settlements, bringing gossip gifts and goods that hadn't been gnawed by rats or pickled beyond recognition. The guest unwraps the cheese with a flourish. It's cracked, veined with blue mold, and crowned with a strange gray fuzz that glows faintly in the firelight. This is gamalost, or something like it, a pungent, soft, powerfully aged cheese believed to be both nutritious and slightly aggressive. You're offered a sliver. You take it. It's creamy, tangy, a little spicy on the back of the tongue, and very, very awake. You take another bite, just to be sure. It wasn't a fluke. It's assertive. Cheese making was a skill passed through generations, especially among women. Made from sour milk and curds, often pressed into wooden molds and aged in root cellars or near the hearth. It provided essential protein and calories when meat was scarce. Some were mild and fresh. Others grew personalities. Historians still argue whether cheese was a luxury food or a survival staple. The sagas mention it sparingly, usually in passing perhaps because it was so ordinary, or perhaps because the odor made detailed descriptions difficult. But archaeological digs have uncovered cheese-making tools and even fragments of aged dairy fused to clay pots. The guest tells a story about a goat who once got drunk on spilled mead and ran through a snowdrift with a cheese wheel in its mouth. You laugh, not because it's necessarily true, but because it could be. And that's enough. Dinner resumes with quiet murmurs and soft chewing. Someone slices the last of the hard flatbread, smears it with cheese, and passes it around. The combination, sharp and dry, tangy and brittle, is unexpectedly perfect. The guest produces a few more treasures from his bag: dried apples, a handful of preserved lingonberries, and, miracle of miracles, a lump of salt cured pork. The children whisper, as if he's pulled out a pouch of gold. This is what winter visiting is about, not just survival, but variety. Small, sharp joys in the endless monochrome of the season. You nibble a berry. It explodes in your mouth like forgotten summer. Later, the guest takes his place near the fire shoes, steaming as they dry. He hums a foreign tune. A woman responds with a melody of her own. And somewhere between the music and the scent of aged cheese, the longhouse feels a little more alive. You lean back, hands warm, belly full of strange delights and sour surprises. Outside, the snow continues to fall. But inside the fire dances, the stories stretch on, and the cheese is miraculously not finished yet. It's the darkest night of the year. The sun barely rose today, just blinked across the horizon like it was testing the air, then vanished again into cloud and dusk. But tonight, there's light. Candles flicker on every beam, bits of tallow, glowing like stars in a wooden sky. A hush falls over the longhouse. Yule has come, and with it, the ceremonial meal. You sit cross-legged near the hearth, the air thick with smoke and expectation. Children hush each other. A woman hums an old chant under her breath. It's not just another winter dinner. Tonight is meant to mean something. Tonight is when you eat, not just to fill your belly, but to remind the gods you're still here. The feast begins with a bowl of jólagrautur, a special porridge made with barley and milk, richer than usual. Creamy, and nestled inside one lucky bowl, a single hidden nut, an almond or hazelnut. Whoever finds it is promised a year of good fortune, or at least the last chunk of butter. You dip your spoon and eat slowly. Warmth spreads down your spine. It's sweetened with a spoonful of honey, rare and golden. You glance around, hoping you're the lucky one. But across the fire, a boy shrieks in triumph. Mouth full and eyes wide, he found it. His sister groans. A small wrestling match ensues. Everyone laughs. Next come the ceremonial meats, simple, symbolic. A slice of dried lamb, a spoonful of whale stew, a cube of pickled fish. Each bite recalls a season, a story, a struggle. Nothing grand, but everything intentional. Then come the breads cracked, rye, smeared with butter, and a smear of lard. If you're lucky, some are dusted with crushed nuts or dried berries. Precious remnants saved from autumn's harvest. You chew slowly, thoughtfully. The bread is tougher than ever, but tonight it tastes like memory. Historians still argue whether Yule feasting traditions were purely Norse or a blend of Christian and pagan rites. The sagas reference midwinter blots, sacrifices to the gods with mead meat and chants. Later records mention Christian hymns and candlelight. Somewhere in the middle, people still gathered, still ate, still hoped. Across the room, someone raises a carved horn cup of mead. A toast is spoken to ancestors, to harvests, to holding out one more year. You lift your own cup and drink. The mead is warm and sweet, tinged with smoke. It coats your throat like reassurance. After dinner, songs begin, soft, slow melodies that twine through the rafters like wood smoke. Someone taps a drum. A girl begins a story about a man who married a seal. Everyone leans in. You notice that the stew tonight has extra herbs, maybe even garlic. There's no fish skin, no bark. Someone added berries. Someone cared. It may be the best thing you've eaten all month. The fire is fed until it roars, and the longhouse glows like a lantern in the snow. Outside, the wind moans, but inside, the light holds, the voices hold, the food humble as it is fills something deeper than your stomach. You sip the last of your porridge, now cooled and thick. A whisper goes around. That one family roasted a bird, an actual bird, a duck, maybe even a goose. You didn't see it. You're not even sure it's real. But in the glow of Yule, anything feels possible. Tonight is not about indulgence. It's about defiance. It's about lighting candles in the face of the longest dark and saying we're still here. We still sing. We still cook stew and hide nuts in porridge and laugh when children argue over them. And when the fire finally dims and you lie back on your straw mat, full of warm milk and salt and smoke, you feel it, a flicker of comfort, of peace, of survival, wrapped in ritual. You're not just eating, you're witnessing winter's turning point. The morning after Yule is quiet, not solemn, just slow. The fire smolders instead of blazes. People move with a kind of satisfied weariness, like they've lived 10 winters in one night and earned a little stillness. You make your way to the back of the longhouse, into the pantry space. Though pantry might be too modern a word for what's essentially a set of shelves, barrels, clay jars, and bundles suspended from beams. This is the domain of the Viking woman of the house, and you step in with a sense of reverence. She's there already, a cloth wrapped around her head, hands dusted in flour, sorting through what remains. Every jar is like a chapter in the winter story, each ingredient a line of defense in the quiet battle against hunger. A basket holds the last of the onions. Dried herbs hang like forgotten prayers. In a clay pot, preserved, berries float in thick syrup, only tapped on rare days. You see sacks of cracked barley sprouted in one corner from a leak in the roof. She sighs, scoops the dry half into a bowl, and carries on. Waste is not an option. She lifts a lid from a wooden tub. Inside, root vegetables submerged in brine, rutabagas, parsnips, the occasional turnip. The smell is vinegary and sharp, and your eyes water slightly, but the roots are firm, preserved well. These boiled down with a scrap of fat or a dash of butter can still be made into something resembling a meal. Historians still argue whether Viking women controlled the entire food operation or merely oversaw it, while men hunted, traded, or raided. But evidence artifacts, sagas, household structures suggest the domestic hearth was their stronghold. They dried, pickled, salted, smoked, and sometimes enchanted. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was knowledge, skill, and quiet power. The woman beside you stokes the coals, then adds twigs soaked in birch sap. A sweet scent rises. She's making the morning gruel smell like spring. She ladles out breakfast, a mix of barley, sour milk, dried apple slices, and a single strand of honey on top. She doesn't smile exactly, but her eyes do. You accept it like a blessing? Then she does something curious. She sprinkles a bit of ash into the fire from a small jar. Not just any ash. You're told it's from the Yule log saved and dried from last night. A protection ritual. A wish. A continuation. Fire rituals were part of daily life. Lighting the hearth each morning was symbolic, inviting warmth, banishing spirits, drawing strength from the gods of the flame. The hearth was the center, not just of cooking, but of memory. When you sat beside it, you weren't alone. Ancestors were there. Stories too. You sip your gruel and stare into the flames. You imagine the generations that sat here before you, chewing the same bark-thick porridge, watching the same logs crack and hiss. Later she shows you how she hangs fish skins to dry, stretching them like parchment, curing them with salt, scraping the scales. These will become snacks, kindling even wrappings for later meat. Nothing is wasted. Not here. You ask about the barrel in the corner. She smiles and lifts the lid. It's filled with dried herbs, yarrow, thyme, juniper. Her medicine chest. She crushes a bit of sage between her fingers and lets you smell. You inhale and taste earth wind and the memory of sun. A child runs, in chasing a goat, knocking over a clay jar that miraculously does not shatter. The woman barely reacts, just nudges the lid back into place with her foot and continues stirring her pot. This is how winter is won. Quietly, through cleverness, and a little ash in the fire. You eat slowly, thinking not of grand battles or gods, but of root cellars, dried herbs, and the miracle of a single soft apple slice in a bowl of gruel. The sun peeks over the mountains today, low and pale, but undeniably there. You blink into the light, your breath still fogging in the cold. Outside, the snow crunches beneath your boots. Not the fresh, fluffy kind, but a sharp, brittle crunch that means things have frozen solid overnight. That includes dinner. You follow a group of villagers heading to the outer shed, a low, narrow building that smells like meat and memory. This is where the real treasure is stored. Bones, hides, and the remnants of once whole animals slowly being repurposed, boiled, or chewed into usefulness. Tonight's meal will be a broth, but not just any broth. One made from bones that have already given up their best parts. Someone slams a cleaver through a sheep leg and tosses the joint into a blackened pot already filled with hooves. Hooves, not what you'd call prime cuts, but full of cartilage and collagen. Boil them long enough, and you get a jelly-rich broth that coats your lips and your soul. The smell wafts through the longhouse by midday. It's comforting. If you can get past the visual of a goat foot doing laps in the cauldron. Children peek in, giggle, and try to count the toes. A woman tosses in dried herbs, probably thyme, maybe yarrow. She adds a few roots that survived winter's tyranny, and just for flair, a splash of sour whey. The broth bubbles, murmuring secrets only the truly hungry can hear. You're handed a ladleful. It's thick, murky, and slightly gelatinous. But when you sip it, warmth floods you instantly. It tastes like the essence of endurance, like the last drop squeezed from survival itself. Next to you, a man gnaws on a cooked hoof. His teeth scrape against it with the confidence of someone who's done this before. You take your own piece and try. It's chewy, gelatinous, vaguely oily, and strangely not bad. Historians still argue whether hooves and bones were emergency rations or regular fare. Some evidence suggests they were common in winter stews, especially when livestock couldn't be slaughtered. Others believe their use was a matter of class. Wealthier households may have skipped them, but for everyone else, they were standard. Someone next to you picks marrow from a roasted bone with the tip of a knife. He offers you a taste. It's buttery, rich, and oddly luxurious. Like the universe accidentally dropped a piece of foie gras into a Viking stew pot. Further down the table, a girl chews on a boiled pig's ear. It flops as she talks. No one bats an eye. The communal nature of the meal makes everything taste better. People dip hard bread into the broth. A dog lurks beneath the benches, snagging fallen scraps with ninja-like reflexes. A toothless elder cackles as he slurps loudly from a carved bowl. You've stopped thinking about texture or what part of what animal you're eating. You're just warm-fed and surrounded by people who've turned hooves into happiness. Later, as the pot is scraped clean, the bones are cleaned, dried, and set aside, not for trash, but for tools. Handles, fish hooks, even knitting needles. Every part of the animal becomes something else. Nothing ends here. It simply changes form. You wipe your mouth with your sleeve and lean back. The broth is still in your chest, radiating like a slow-burning fire. You no longer ask what's in the pot. You just trust the process. And in a way, that's what winter food teaches you. Not to crave perfection, but to recognize nourishment in unexpected places. Like the hoof you just chewed and kind of miss already. You wake to the sound of chopping, sharp, rhythmic, methodical. Outside, someone is cracking ice, but inside, the work is quieter, more deliberate. You shuffle to the back of the longhouse, where two figures crouch near a stack of barrels. A cloud of cold air escapes as one is pried open. The scent that hits you is complicated. This is the leftovers corner, the deep winter stash, the we'll deal with it later, collection, and now later has come. One barrel holds fermented fish. Another is filled with cabbage that once had good intentions. A third contains an unidentifiable stew sealed in fat. This is where winter's optimism came to hibernate and sometimes ferment into regret. But here's the thing. It's all still edible. Mostly. You watch as a woman lifts a frozen slab of something grayish and translucent. It's stockfish that froze before it could finish drying. Into the pot it goes. A chunk of whale blubber follows, then a handful of barley, and a generous splash of sour whey. The smell becomes richer, more savory, less alarming. Preservation was an art form in the Viking world, but art, as always, is subjective. They froze food in pits lined with straw-buried meat in snowbanks, and pickled vegetables in brine that sometimes turned to slush. Some methods worked better than others. A few items took on new, unexpected personalities. You're handed a slice of what appears to be dried pork belly. It's tough, brittle, and coated in frost. You bite down. It tastes like firewood salt and distant memory. But once it softens, there's real flavor. Smoke fat. A whisper of sweetness from the cure. Historians still argue whether these strange preservation methods were widespread or experimental. Some suggest that each village had its own version of, let's see if this survives the winter. Others believe the oddities came later. Once trade introduced more variety and chaos into the mix, a girl walks past, chewing a piece of fish skin like gum. She offers you one. You hesitate, then accept. It's thin, salty, and crisp, like a Viking potato chip, if potatoes weren't invented yet, and chips had texture like dried parchment. At the hearth, someone slices into a hard blackened loaf that had been forgotten behind a barrel. Mold is trimmed off with precision. The center is toasted over coals rubbed with lard and sprinkled with powdered seaweed. You take a bite. It's not awful. And weirdly, the seaweed gives it a nutty depth. Or maybe that's just your survival instincts rebranding desperation as umami. You learn quickly that nothing goes to waste. Even food mistakes, overcured, meat, too sour, milk pickles turned pungent, are repurposed, diluted, or reheated into something vaguely nourishing. As one man says with a shrug, if it doesn't kill the dog, it'll do for dinner. And if it does kill the dog, well, that's what the tasting spoon is for. There's comfort in this chaos, in knowing that last month's failure might become tomorrow's side dish, in the way people joke about preserved surprises while still ladling out generous portions. You sit by the fire with a bowl of mixed leftover stew. It's thick with barley, speckled with something greenish, and topped with a chunk of mystery meat so tender it falls apart at the touch of your spoon. You eat it all, slowly, gratefully, because in this world, flavor is second to function, and food doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be there. And when the wind rises again, when the door rattles, and the goats huddle close, you'll remember that even the strangest barrel in the pantry can still hold enough calories to get you through another night. The fire is low, the night is long, and the pantry is quieter now. Its barrels half empty, its hanging meats fewer and further between. You sit curled beside the hearth wool blanket, tucked tight around your shoulders, and chew slowly on the last snack of the day-dried cod skin. It crunches, not unpleasantly. Not like the first time when your teeth weren't prepared for its papery defiance. Now it breaks apart with a crisp snap, salty and oddly satisfying, like a campfire chip made from ocean and time. Vikings treated dried cod skin as both food and utility. It could be eaten, sure, but it also served as a fire starter, a binding material, even when rehydrated and softened, a kind of emergency wrapping. Tonight, though it's your midnight snack, you watch an elder nearby shave the scales from another strip. He does it with the reverence of a craftsman, like he's handling parchment instead of fish leather. Then he bites off a piece and nods to you, a gesture of solidarity, of survival. It's quiet now. The goats have long since stopped their shuffling. Children are asleep beneath fur blankets. The stew pot has gone still, and the snow outside presses against the walls as if listening. You shift closer to the fire. The heat licks at your face, the flames dancing low and steady. Someone snores. Someone dreams. You're not sure which camp you're falling into yet. There's comfort in this hush, a kind of sacred simplicity. You've eaten fish, skin bark, bread, sour porridge, goat cheese, boiled hooves, and fermented regrets, and yet here you are, fed warm. Maybe even content. Historians still argue whether this kind of winter resilience came from necessity or cultural pride. Some claim the Viking diet was a last resort, a stubborn refusal to starve. Others say it was crafted with care, passed down like a saga, each meal another verse in the long poem of surviving the North. You lean back, watching the last curl of steam rise from your wooden cup. A thin broth of bone and brine, sipped slowly like an elixir. The woman who runs the hearth places a dried herb bundle near the coals. It releases a faint scent, sweet, earthy, calming, maybe yarrow, maybe something only she remembers. Tonight, there's no feast, no ceremony, just a few remaining bites of the season, scraps of smoked meat, a crust of bread softened in broth, and the gentle sound of breathing yours and everyone else's, a chorus of quiet victory. This is the real feast, not a spread of luxury, but a fire that hasn't gone out, a pot that always has something in it, and hands that keep stirring, slicing, storing against all odds. You close your eyes. The cod skin dissolves on your tongue. The fire crackles like an old friend telling one last joke before sleep. You're full in a strange and deeply ancient way. You've tasted winter, and it tasted like survival. The fire dims slowly, now settling into embers, orange and soft. You lie back against the straw mat, the scent of smoke clinging gently to your blanket, to your skin, to your thoughts. Above the rafters creak as the wind moves past. The snow whispers against the walls. Nothing urgent, nothing loud, just the sound of a world blanketed in stillness. Your belly is warm with broth and stories. Around you, quiet breaths rise and fall. A child murmurs in sleep. A goat shifts softly in its pen. Even the stew pot rests now, having fed more than just hunger. You picture the salted fish hanging above the barrels, tucked tight into corners. The pots packed with sour milk, the slabs of dried bread, suspended like time capsules, not elegant, not modern, but enduring. You've shared meals with strangers and song with snowstorms. You've gnawed bones and tasted honey. You've learned how far a people will go to turn scarcity into tradition, hardship into heritage, bark into bread. The Vikings didn't just survive winter, they chewed through it, one salted fish, one flatbread, one bitter root at a time. And now so have you. So let the cold wait at the door. Let the wind press softly against the timber walls. You are here wrapped in wool and firelight, the longhouse breathing slow and deep around you. There is no more porridge tonight, no more fish skin, no more chewing. Just the quiet. Let your eyes grow heavy now. Let the fire lull you. Let the stories settle in your bones, like warmth. You've eaten. You've endured. You're safe. You're full sleep. Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something a little unexpected. You're walking into a smoky Viking longhouse, boots crunching over old rushes and drop bones when someone turns to greet you. Their eyes are fierce, beard-braided voice, gravelly. And then they smile. Their teeth are striped. It begins with a flicker from the hearth, dancing shadows across the longhouse wall. Around you, warriors lounge with flagons of ale, and every once in a while one of them laughs, wide-mouthed, fearless, and gleaming. Their teeth are patterned with horizontal grooves, carefully carved into the enamel. Some have only 2 or 3 others. Entire sets etched like the grain of old birchwood. These aren't dental accidents. They're art. We used to think Vikings didn't care much about appearance. Dirty, rugged axe-swinging types. But archaeology had other ideas. Graves in Sweden, particularly at a site in southern Skåne, revealed male skeletons with deliberate carvings across their front teeth. The grooves were symmetrical, intentional, deep enough to catch the light. The first time someone found them, they thought it was damage, maybe chewing on bones or biting swords. But no, these marks were too neat, too careful. Someone took the time using rudimentary tools, likely flint or bone, maybe even fine metal, to carve designs into a living person's mouth. And yes, while they were alive, there's no evidence of pain, relief, no mention of clove oil or fermented numb juice, just a file, a mouth, and the willpower to sit still while your front teeth were turned into trophies. Historians still argue whether this was ceremonial, social, or something else entirely. Was it a mark of courage? An initiation? Did only the warriors wear them, or slaves? Or perhaps it was tribal, like a badge saying, I belong here, and I bite. You inch closer to the hearth and study a warrior whose teeth glimmer with faint pigment. Black, possibly ochre or ash rubbed into the grooves. Some say Vikings may have colored their dental art to enhance visibility or to make an even bigger impression in the midst of battle. Imagine roaring sword raised your smile, catching the sunlight like runes etched in ivory. Sitting beside him, a young boy runs his finger across his own teeth, imitating the pattern. He doesn't have any marks yet, but it's clear he wants them. This apparently is a rite of passage. You don't ask for them, you earn them. Maybe after your first raid. Maybe after surviving a long winter without crying once. The rules aren't written, they're remembered. But the older men watch, and one nods. Tooth decoration wasn't unique to Vikings, but the precision found in Scandinavian burials is fascinating. The grooves were cut laterally, usually across the top front teeth, rarely deeper than 1 millimeter, but enough to alter the look. enough to make you think twice before challenging the man behind that grin. You're handed a horn of ale, and someone asks if you'd ever do it. File your own teeth. You laugh nervously. Everyone else just waits for your answer. You don't give one. As night deepens, the fire glows low and the shadows stretch long. Someone pulls a tiny bone tool from a pouch, a slender, worn shard polished on one edge. It's a file, or maybe a chisel. It fits in the hand, like a secret. No one speaks, but they all glance at it with the reverence of a relic. You lie back on your straw mat, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Beams, the sound of distant waves beyond the walls. And just before sleep takes you, you wonder what it would feel like to carry your victories in your smile. The next morning, you're still thinking about those teeth. You step outside into a pale, frigid dawn, boots crunching over frostbitten grass. Smoke rises in gentle plumes from neighboring longhouses, and somewhere nearby, a blacksmith hammers away at a horseshoe, or maybe something more sinister like a tooth chisel. Because what you saw last night wasn't just decoration, it was declaration. Back inside, an elder sits cross-legged near the fire, sharpening a knife with calm, deliberate strokes. His own teeth. What's left of them still bear the faded traces of parallel grooves. Time has worn them down, yellowed them, chipped their edges. But the pattern remains ghostly and defiant. You ask him about it. He doesn't answer directly. Instead, he reaches into a pouch and pulls out a flat piece of antler, then a thin shard of bronze and a long, curved bone needle. He lays them out carefully like sacred instruments. You begin to understand the tools used in this strange, almost forgotten practice weren't crude, just simple, elegant, even in the same way. A bow is elegant when it bends to launch an arrow straight into someone's future. Filing teeth required a steady hand and an even steadier victim. There was no margin for error. A slip meant pain. A deeper slip meant the entire tooth might shatter. And still, people did it. They volunteered for it. Some even asked for designs, multiple stripes, cross hatches, diamonds. A few examples suggest geometric symbols, maybe even tiny runes. Historians still argue whether these were ornamental or coded. Were they decorative, or did they whisper meaning? Were you a berserker, a chieftain, a wanderer? Did the grooves speak for you? It's hard to say, because teeth, as it turns out, don't write history. They just survive it. Across Scandinavia, a small but growing number of archaeological finds reveal tooth modifications. Southern Sweden, eastern Denmark, even as far inland as Viking Age settlements in Norway. Most of the filed teeth appear on adult men, typically young or middle-aged, almost always. Front teeth. Incisors, the part that shows first in a grin or a growl. But here's where it gets tricky. The burials don't always match the grandeur of the modification. One man, with ornately filed teeth, was found with no weapons, no treasure, just a few animal bones and a rusty brooch. Another had a war axe by his side and beads of amber around his neck. The contrast leads to one of archaeology's most nagging debates. Were these elite warriors social outcasts or something else entirely? Some scholars believe tooth filing denoted status, perhaps like a tattoo, a badge of bravery or belonging. Others think it could have been more practical, maybe even mystical. A charm against death, a mark to frighten enemies, or a rite to prove pain meant nothing anymore. You imagine sitting still while someone scrapes a groove into your incisor with a bone pick and a stone file. No numbing, no distraction, just the slow grind of nerve-meeting ritual. You wonder what would hurt more, the process or the silence that came with it. Back in the longhouse, the elder picks up the antler shard and runs it over the fire, blackening the tip. He gestures toward your mouth with a grin. You step back. He laughs deep and raspy, like someone who's done this before, maybe more than once. He motions again, this time for you to sit. You do. He opens a pouch of ash and crushed herbs, mixing them with spit into a paste. The color turns dark, earthy, almost metallic. He dabs it onto a carved stick, then gently presses it to his own teeth. The black streaks settle into his old grooves, making them visible again under the firelight. He hands the stick to you. You try it. Just for effect, you tell yourself, but in the mirror, polished back of a copper ladle, your reflection stares back with a mouth that looks different, older, wilder, as if the longhouse has claimed another member of the clan. Later that day, you meet a young man whose smile is painfully fresh. The grooves on his teeth are raw, still tinged with red. He moves his tongue carefully, lips parted as if every shift might sting. He winces when he eats, but when others look at him, they nod with respect. You ask him why he did it. He shrugs, to be seen. And suddenly, that says more than any saga ever could. The wind picks up outside as snow begins to drift across the longhouse threshold, but inside, things are warming up. Not from the hearth, though it still crackles softly, but from the low buzz of conversation. The topic, the process, because when it came to Viking tooth decoration, the how was almost as fascinating and horrifying as the why. You move closer to the group, circled around the elder. They're passing around a cloth bundle. Inside, gleaming in the firelight, are tools that look like they belong more in a carpenter's kit than a dentist's. A sliver of whalebone sharpened at one end, a flat flint chip with one side worn smooth, a bronze awl polished from years of use, and finally, a tiny hammerstone, headed palm-sized, bound in sinew. You feel your stomach clench. These were instruments of transformation and pain. There's no question about it. Viking tooth filing was manual, brutal, and precise. A groove wasn't just scraped. It was carefully etched, often with multiple passes. The recipient would sit or lie down, mouth open, and endure the filing stroke by stroke. Each tooth could take hours, days even. And the tools weren't sterilized. Infection possible, agony assured. Historians still argue whether this kind of dental work was done by designated specialists, perhaps a tooth priest, a warrior shaman of sorts, or whether any brave soul could do it. Some theories suggest the role fell to elders with steady hands. Others point toward the blacksmith, cast those already skilled in shaping bone, wood, and metal. You glance around at the people gathered in the longhouse. One man has a groove so deep it nearly splits his front tooth. Another bears faint, diagonal marks, like crossed lines. Perhaps a clan symbol. The variation is striking. No two patterns are quite alike. One woman seated near the fire with a loom at her feet leans forward and smiles. Her teeth are unmarked, but she touches her lip briefly and murmurs that her brother has 4 grooves. 1 for every successful raid. You imagine sitting through it. The grit, the heat of the file against your enamel, the shiver as it vibrates into your skull. There's no sedation, no numbing salve, just the sound of scraping and the pressure of a hand holding your jaw in place. A young boy offers to show you the start of his own filing, a shallow notch, barely visible on his right incisor. His pride glows brighter than the groove itself. It's not about visibility, it's about initiation. Not all decorations were grooves, though. There are whispers of colored paste rubbed into freshly filed teeth, charcoal, soot, crushed berries, even blood. The staining wouldn't last more than a few days, but in the right moment, at a feast during a raid, it created a theatrical effect. A burst of black or red that flashed from your smile like a war cry. Some skeletal remains even suggest tiny holes drilled into the teeth, possibly to hold pigment or decorative inserts. The evidence is sparse but compelling. Historians still debate whether these drilled cavities were intentional ornamentation or post-mortem damage. But if they were decorative, then the Vikings weren't just etching lines. They were building tiny canvases in their mouths. And for what? Fear may be prestige. Or perhaps, as one theory suggests, it was about spiritual armor, marking the body as already transformed, so that no enemy mortal or mystical could lay further claim to it. You touch your own teeth. Smooth, plain, almost embarrassingly undecorated. The elder takes the tiny hammer and taps it gently against the flat end of the awl. The sound is soft, rhythmic, ceremonial, like the beat of an ancient metronome marking time not in seconds, but in sacrifice. A man with a bandaged jaw enters the longhouse. He's grinning, or trying to. His front teeth are wrapped in linen, but his eyes are full of triumph. He did it. He sat for the chisel. He endured the fire in his skull. And now his smile will tell the tale for years. You step outside, into the snow to breathe. The air bites your cheeks, but your mouth is warm, your tongue brushing your teeth with newfound curiosity. Behind you, the soft clang of tools resumes like a forge for faces. By the time you return to the longhouse, snow has caked your boots, and your eyebrows are trying to freeze together. But inside the glow of the hearth and the steady murmur of voices pull you back into the rhythm of things. A bowl of thin stew waits by the fire, mostly root vegetables and yesterday's memories, and as you eat, you notice something peculiar. A man across from you has decorated teeth. Yes, but he also wears a finely woven cloak, clasped with a bronze brooch, shaped like a wolf's head. He's clearly someone important. Chieftain merchant, battle-tested, or just well-fed. He catches your gaze and flashes a smile. His front teeth are cross-hatched, like a tiny lattice fence. Nothing about it looks accidental. You begin to wonder, was this more than ornament? Did these grooves mark him not just as brave, but as someone powerful? Throughout the Viking world, social hierarchy mattered even among people who claimed to value strength and loyalty above status jewelry. Weaponry, house size, these all played a part, but tooth decoration, that was permanent. You couldn't take it off. You couldn't pawn it, and it hurt like hell to get. Historians still argue whether these decorations were marks of rank loyalty or something closer to a personal brand. Some believe only the elite had the time and resources to undergo the painful process. Others argue it was a democratized badge. Anyone who could endure it could wear it regardless of their place in the village. There's even speculation that some decorated teeth signaled a specific role. Warriors with a certain groove pattern, perhaps. Seers or spiritual guides with another. The archaeological record is frustratingly silent bones. Don't whisper their stories unless we already know how to ask. You recall stories from earlier in the day, a warrior with 4 stripes for 4 raids. Another who earned a diagonal slash after surviving a bear attack. One man whose teeth were etched only after death as part of a burial rite. These weren't just fashion statements. They were milestones, worn in the mouth like a timeline. You finish your stew and watch as the chieftain rises. He speaks in a low, rhythmic voice, recounting tales of travel to Frankish lands, down rivers that spill into wide sunlit plains. He talks of the rusts of Byzantine gold, of marketplaces where ivory and silk met furs and fish oil. And then he gestures to his teeth. These, he says, through his accented Norse, are from Miklagard, Constantinople. You blink. Did he just say his tooth pattern was from Byzantium? It seems absurd. And yet it opens a new possibility. Were Viking tooth decorations influenced by encounters abroad? Perhaps what you're looking at isn't just a northern custom, but part of a broader, older tradition. There are documented examples of tooth filing in West Africa, in Central America, in Southeast Asia, cultures that value decorated teeth for beauty, adulthood, protection. Could it be that Vikings borrowed the idea during their travels? Or did the practice arise independently in different corners of the world? A shared human impulse to shape the body in ways that said, "This is me, and I am not ordinary." The debate remains. Some scholars say no Viking tooth decoration is too rare, too localized. Others point out that Viking raiders, traders and settlers absorbed ideas wherever they went. They wore silk, drank wine, mimicked weapon styles. Why not teeth? The chieftain grins again. His grooves glisten faintly from the fire's reflection. The patterns more art than accident. They don't just catch the light, they command it. Outside, the snow thickens. Inside, the longhouse hums with soft conversation, the crack of logs, and the occasional flash of a smile that could cut through darkness. You lean back against a beam, chewing on a brittle strip of dried fish, and think maybe pain was part of the point. Maybe altering your smile something so central, so human, was the Viking way of saying this. Mouth speaks for someone who has endured. And really, what better story is there to wear on your face? The next morning breaks slow and gray, the sky still heavy with snow. You step out of the longhouse and catch your breath at the cold, sharp, sudden cleansing. Around you, the village begins to stir. Someone chops wood. Someone else curses at a goat, but your attention drifts to the nearby stream, partially frozen, where a man kneels with a small blade and something clenched between his teeth. You creep closer. He's scraping a groove along his incisor, the movement slow and careful. Not deep, not yet. It's a preparation. And beside him, wrapped in cloth, lies a tiny pot of something dark. When he sees you, he grins, blood beating along the groove like a jewel. He dips a twig into the pot, rubs it into the line. The effect is immediate. His tooth darkens the stripe, stark against white enamel. Tooth decoration, it turns out, wasn't always limited to carving. Some Vikings painted their teeth, temporarily staining them with ash, herbs, or even metals. The goal: visibility shock, or maybe just flair. Historians still argue about the ingredients used for tooth staining. Birch ash was common, as was charcoal. There's even speculation about iron oxide, the same compound found in ochre paints, and some suggest crushed blueberries were used for a temporary purplish hue, although that may have been accidental, the result of snacking mid-styling session. You ask the man why he does it. His answer is simple: to stand out. In a world of steel and silence, being seen mattered. Later in the day, you're invited to a gathering. Not a feast, too little food for that, but a kind of social circle, a fireside gathering, where stories are shared and reputations quietly polished. As people speak, smiles flash between phrases, and those with decorated teeth, their words seem to land harder. Their jokes draw more laughs. There's a performative quality here. Decorated teeth aren't just worn, they're wielded. A pause in speech, a cocked head, a smile, timed just right, and suddenly, those grooves become punctuation marks. Grim, glittering italics. You sit next to a woman who leans in to whisper. Some say the first filed teeth belong to the Godi, the spiritual leaders of Viking communities, before the warriors copied them. She shrugs. But who can say? Another debate, another theory. It wouldn't be far-fetched. Ritual leaders often mark themselves clothing tattoos, scarification to signify their role as liminal beings, part of the community but slightly apart. If anyone was going to etch permanent symbols into their smile, it might have been those who spoke with the gods. You glance around the circle again, looking for patterns. Are some grooves sharper, longer? Do they vary by age, status, gender? There's no clear answer, which of course is exactly why scholars still argue. The lack of uniformity suggests a personal choice, but even personal choices, repeated often enough, become tradition. The man beside you chuckles and shows you his teeth. They're dyed black with soot. No grooves, just color. This, he says, tapping his front tooth, scares the English. Then he laughs harder. You wonder what a Saxon monk might have thought upon meeting a Viking, whose mouth shimmered with black lines or red-streaked enamel. You picture the clash of cultures, robed scribes versus men who carved art into their bodies, one tooth at a time. It's a clash, not just of weapons, but of aesthetics. And maybe that's the point. In battle, in trade, in storytelling, how you presented yourself mattered. Clothes could be copied, beards could be grown, but your teeth, that was commitment. That was a message. That was something that said, I choose to carry pain in my smile. You lean back and close your eyes, the crackle of fire and soft Norse murmurs surrounding you. In the warm dark behind your eyelids, you picture that black smile again. Brilliant, terrible, unforgettable. And then softly, you smile too. That night, the wind howls louder than before, hurling flakes of snow like insults against the longhouse walls. You lie awake on your straw mat, listening to the creak of timber, the occasional snore, and the embers whispering secrets in the hearth. Eventually, you doze off. And when you wake, it's to the sound of shouting, not anger, celebration. You scramble outside into the biting cold, breath-pluming heart thudding. In the open space near the frozen stream, a group of warriors is gathered, laughing, cheering, stomping the snow into muddy slush. In the middle stands a figure shirtless, despite the cold chest, heaving face flushed with exertion. And when he turns and grins, there it is, a gleaming, freshly filed set of teeth. 6 bold grooves across the top row, blackened with soot, catching the dawn light like carved obsidian. The crowd roars. This is a rite, a moment of transformation. You've arrived at a grin, giving an informal ceremony, celebrating someone's initiation into the brotherhood of the marked. The man's name is Gear. He's just returned from a raid down the coast, and these teeth are his proof. No scars, no trophies, just a smile that says I've done what few have done, and I paid the toll in enamel. Historians still argue whether such gatherings were formalized or spontaneous. Some suggest they were tightly linked to coming-of-age ceremonies. Others believe they emerged only in certain clans or during particular eras, moments when tooth decoration peaked only to fade again with shifting norms. You stay and watch as Gear is offered a horn of ale, which he drains in one go. The crowd cheers again. And then someone steps forward, an older man, beard like a raven's nest, teeth bare and lined with deep horizontal cuts. He places a hand on Gear's shoulder and mutters something low, something rhythmic. It sounds like a blessing or a warning. Later inside the longhouse, Gear sits near the hearth, sipping warm broth tongue, running over his new grooves. The pain is setting in. He winces, but he smiles anyway, because this pain, this one's earned. You sit beside him. He nods, holds out a small wooden shard. It's stained with black paste, the same kind used on his teeth. You turn it over in your hands, still sticky, still warm. Across the fire, a child whispers to her mother, "One day, I'll have teeth like Gear's." The mother smiles. Faintly, doesn't respond. Because here's the truth. Not everyone wanted those marks. Not everyone could handle them. To some, they were a symbol of courage. To others, folly, vanity, even blasphemy. As Viking culture evolved, and especially as Christianity crept its way into the north, decorated teeth began to raise eyebrows, not cheers. Church records sparse, but revealing mention efforts to discourage pagan disfigurements. Some monks viewed the practice as devilish. Others simply couldn't understand why anyone would willingly mutilate their own smile. And so, while Gear's grooves shine today, you can already sense the tension on the horizon. In time, what is admired now will be condemned. But not yet. For tonight, Gear is a hero. A grinning warrior wrapped in furs and firelight. He tips his horn in your direction and bares his teeth again, black and bold, as if inked by fate itself. And you realize something. This isn't just about intimidation. It's about identity, a way of marking your story in the one place no one can borrow, steal, or sell, right behind your smile. The days grow shorter, the snow deepens, and in the dim hush of a late afternoon, you find yourself following a group of villagers toward the outskirts of the settlement where the ground rises slightly, and the wind has carved strange hollows into the drifts. They're headed to the burial ground. Someone has died. You don't ask who too many names in a place like this fade into the frost. But the procession is solemn, quiet, and oddly beautiful. Fur-lined cloaks sway, and torches burn low and steady. A sled carries the wrapped body surrounded by tools, weapons, and a small carved chest. You walk alongside a man who explains in a whisper he was a carver, a tooth carver. He nods. As the group gathers around a shallow grave, you watch them lower the body with care. The man's face is uncovered, pale, still dusted with ice. His teeth, even in death, gleam with pattern. Not just striped symbols, tiny triangles, one shaped like a fish, another like a tree. Your breath catches. You lean closer. These weren't just decorative lines. They were a language. Historians still argue whether Viking tooth decorations carried literal meanings, words, prayers, ancestral references. So far, no clear tooth alphabet has been found, but patterns repeat across regions, perhaps the same way that tattoos today might say warrior in one culture and freedom in another. Viking grooves conveyed layered context, bound meanings. The body is covered and the villagers begin to drift away. You linger. When the others are gone, you notice two children crouched at the edge of the grave. One points at the man's teeth. "He carved my father's," she says. You ask what the symbols meant. She shrugs. "He said they were for strength and for remembering. Later, inside the longhouse, you sit with the elder who once showed you the tools. He confirms the man's role. He marked many, the old one says, but only the brave asked for symbols. The rest were content with lines. You ask how the symbols were chosen. He smiles faintly. They were whispered. You press further, but he only shakes his head. Some things must stay under the tongue. The mystery deepens. Perhaps these marks were more than decoration, more than status. Perhaps they were protective charms or memorials, one mark for a lost brother, one for a storm survived, one for a battle unwon, but returned from the scholar in you aches for records, for context. But the Viking world didn't run on parchment. It ran on memory. And memory, it seems, was sometimes etched into bone. You fall asleep that night, staring into the fire, its light flickering across the faces around you. So many mouths, so many stories. You begin to read the teeth of those you know. Gear's victory stripes, the elder's faint crosshatches, the child with one tiny notch dreaming of more. And you wonder, what would yours say? Morning fog curls low across the fjord, thick and quiet as wool. The boats bob gently at their moorings, their sails tied and furled for winter. But today, you're not sailing. Today, you're listening. Because inside the longhouse, just past the fire, an old traveler has returned. He's bent wrapped in layered wool and patched leather, but his eyes gleam like moonlight on ice. As he settles down on a stool, the others draw close. You do too quiet, attentive, curious. His teeth show when he speaks, not just filed, painted, streaked in blue. Your heart skips. The old man claims to have once traded far east beyond Novgorod, beyond the great rivers, to lands where men wore linen robes and gold rings braided into their beards. And there, he says, he met warriors with teeth inked in green and red teeth shaped to points. Everyone leans closer. Could this be true? Historians still argue whether Viking tooth decoration was a homegrown tradition or something picked up during their expansive travels. The evidence is tantalizing. Similar practices existed in Mesoamerica, where Mayan elites inlaid jade into their teeth. In West Africa, elaborate tooth filing was a sign of maturity and rank. Even in parts of Southeast Asia, sharpened teeth were linked to beauty and spiritual strength. Did the Vikings see these things and bring them home? Or was it parallel evolution? Different peoples expressing the same impulse in different ways. The old man pulls a small bundle from his pack and unwraps it. Inside, a sliver of polished bone with what looks like tiny holes drilled at intervals. Decorative or functional. He taps his own tooth and smiles. This is from the Volga. You examine the piece. It's shaped like a comb, but finer. Perhaps for filing grooves, or he claims for applying pigment. He doesn't say what the pigment is. Trade secret. He chuckles. A young woman speaks up. But why the color? Why blue? He squints. So they know me. In battle, in trade, in stories. The others nod, not quite understanding, but not questioning either. You wonder how the Vikings might have viewed these external styles, copying, admiring, merging with their own beliefs. We know they absorbed many foreign elements, clothes, weapons, even gods. Odin himself has roots that may stretch beyond Scandinavia. So why not tooth art? The old man gestures toward the fire. In Francia they mock our teeth, but in Rus they remember them. A man once paid me a goat just to see my smile again. You laugh softly. The idea that a grin could be currency is oddly poetic. Outside, the fog begins to lift. Sunlight pushes through, like an afterthought gilding the snow with a faint shimmer. Inside, the old man wraps his tools again, then nods toward a child beside him. The boy opens his mouth. Two thin blue lines now mark his front teeth. Fresh, still raw. His first, the man says, a traveler's mark. The room is quiet, respectful. You think again about the colors, the grooves, the purpose. Maybe it was all those things, status, identity, intimidation. But maybe it was also connection, a shared language across oceans. A way to say, I belong to something old, and I bring it with me every time I smile. You lean back, the heat from the hearth settling into your bones. The whispers of foreign lands drifting through the smoky air. And just before your eyes close, you imagine a Viking ship sliding silently into a misty harbor. Its crew stepping ashore, grinning wide, with teeth that shimmer in strange, beautiful hues. The snow is melting, not much, but enough to turn the paths slick and the thatch eaves into steady drippers. You step carefully outside, pausing to watch two boys sword fight with sticks. One grins broadly after a dramatic victory, and there it is, a single shiny groove carved across his front tooth. You smile back. It's contagious. Back inside the longhouse, the topic has shifted. Not why the Vikings carved their teeth, but who did it. And the question now floating over the stew pots is, this was it? Only men. Across the fire, an older woman raises an eyebrow. She bares her teeth. Two faint slanted marks cross her upper canines, not as deep as the warriors, but unmistakable. A few of the younger women lean in. Intrigued, she shrugs, then goes back to spinning wool, as if her smile isn't rewriting half your assumptions. Historians still argue whether Viking women participated in tooth decoration. Most of the archaeological evidence so far, almost all, comes from male skeletons. But that doesn't necessarily mean it was exclusive. Burial preservation favors certain demographics. And as always, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. You look around the room and start noticing the subtler signs, a girl with teeth that seem slightly too symmetrical to be natural. A woman polishing a carved comb that looks suspiciously like a file. A quiet kind of pride, not announced, but not hidden either. Maybe it was rarer. Maybe it meant something different. Maybe it was done in secret. The elderly woman beside you finally speaks. I filed mine the winter before my wedding. My mother said it made me look strong. You ask if it hurt. She chuckles. Worse than childbirth, but faster. Another woman joins in. We did it to match our brothers. They went raiding. We stayed. But we could wear the same marks. Some were probably hidden behind shy smiles. Others were shown boldly, defiantly. Not everyone had to brandish a sword to be formidable. You hear the story of a shield maiden buried with her weapons near Birka, a site in Sweden, her remains stirring centuries of debate. Did she fight? Or was she buried like a man for other reasons? Either way, she held a place of power. If she had tooth decoration, it's lost now. But you wonder, a girl beside the fire is humming as she paints tiny white lines onto her teeth with a brush made of crow feather. It's temporary, just decoration for a festival. But still, the idea's there. Adornment as identity, the body as canvas. Not every Viking woman may have filed her teeth, but many understood the message of a marked mouth, strength, memory, mystery. As you watch, the girl accidentally smears the paint. She curses, wipes it, tries again. Her sister giggles. Her mother watches with that quiet mix of tolerance and pride. And you realize the tradition may have faded from bones, but it lives on in stories, in imitation, in ritual, in curiosity. Later, the elder shows you a box, inside teeth, not hers, carved wooden ones, passed down training tools maybe, or just keepsakes. Some have deep symmetrical lines, others bear symbols. One in particular has a crescent moon etched into it, faint but deliberate. For dreams, she says, you nod. Because what else is a tooth, if not the last place a dream might hide? You leave the box carefully closed and return to your mat near the hearth. The flames throw slow-moving shadows across the rafters, where bread hangs in rings and stories cling like smoke. And you sleep now, knowing this in Viking culture. Power wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was whispered into enamel, etched under torchlight, and worn quietly by women who knew exactly what their smile meant. A few days pass. The cold has softened the village creaks less, and you've almost gotten used to the sight of carved teeth flashing at you from every conversation. Almost today, though something's different. You're invited to a smaller gathering, not a feast, not a funeral, but something quieter, more private. Inside the longhouse, a small group of men and women sit around a central table, laid out before them tools, but not just any tools. Bone files, bronze awls, carved sticks, tipped with soot, black brushes. You've stumbled into something rare, a workshop of sorts, a gathering of the carvers. You sit tentative. No one sends you away. One woman is sharpening a flat chip of antler on a whetstone. Another tests a pigment mix by dabbing it onto a piece of bark. In the corner, a young boy practices carving grooves into a row of sheep teeth lashed to a wooden frame. Each attempt more confident than the last. This isn't ritual. This is craft. And it's beautiful. You pick up a tool light, smooth stained from years of use, and realize just how much control it must have taken to create a clean groove. One slip, and the tooth could splinter. One wrong angle, and the design would be forever crooked. Historians still argue whether these tools were used exclusively for tooth decoration or if they served multiple roles. Carving bone-shaping jewelry, cleaning small hides, multifunctional tools were common in the Viking world. But here today, these implements have one purpose. A man speaks. Not all who file teeth do it well, and not all who do it well are remembered. He shows you his own, a set of vertical notches instead of horizontal, carved with such symmetry, they look almost unnatural. He's the closest thing to a tooth artist you've seen. Another woman joins in, the best file with their eyes closed. She says this without smiling. Then after a long beat, she smiles, and her teeth bear a spiral. A spiral. You sit back stunned, because this goes far beyond intimidation or imitation. This is design, identity communication. An entire visual language tucked into the mouth, flashed and hidden in turn. In the back of the room, there's a wooden board hung on the wall. Painted roughly faded from smoke, but still visible, a chart of patterns, lines, dots, crosses, curves. No labels, just symbols. You ask what it is, their names, someone says, or what they wanted to say. You wonder, was this a code, a shared vocabulary among the marked, or a mnemonic system? Each symbol helping to remember a story, a promise, a loss. No one confirms, but no one denies it either. One elder places a piece of driftwood into your hands. On it, the front of a human skull has been carefully carved into practice grooves, shallow etchings. You shiver, not because it's macabre, but because it's precise. Art in the most unexpected place. You watch for hours. People file, whisper, share, tips, argue gently over angle and depth. It's not unlike watching a guild at work, calligraphers of the bone. By the end of the evening, the woman with the spiral teeth offers you a shard of birch bark soaked in dye. You take it, press it to your teeth, staining them temporarily. Everyone nods, no words needed. Because here, even the smallest mark is a conversation. And as the fire burns low, and the brushes are cleaned, and the tools wrapped in linen, you realize you've just witnessed something sacred, not religious, but intimate. The Viking art of tooth decoration was not merely about power or pain or pride. It was about craftsmanship, about leaving something behind in the one place no one expects a message, your own mouth. The next morning, you're walking the edge of the village when you hear a horn echo through the hills, a low, mournful note that means visitors. You follow the sound past melting snowbanks and piles of fish bones until you reach the shoreline where 3 longships are pulling in their dragon-proud silhouettes, slicing through the mist. Trade ships, the kind that bring stories and smiles. The villagers gather exchanging nods and crates, bundles of dried herbs, lengths of fur, but you're watching mouths. Because among the arrivals are men with teeth notched in unfamiliar ways, slashes that run at an angle, dots not lines, some stained, yes, but with red, not black. One man even has a bronze ring through a tooth. You blink. You've never seen that before. The visitors laugh, drink, share food, and soon comparisons begin. Grins, widen, people point, nod, squint. One man uses a fishbone to trace his own groove pattern in the snow, then points to a younger boy in the village. The patterns match. This isn't chance. This is connection. Historians still argue whether there were shared dialects of tooth decoration among Viking age groups. The presence of similar groove styles in graves hundreds of miles apart suggests either cultural diffusion or a mobile tradition. Roving carvers, trade-based apprenticeships, or warriors spreading styles along with their sagas. A merchant you speak to claims he was marked in Hedeby down south. Another grins and says his lines were earned in Dublin. And suddenly, you realize the teeth are a map, not drawn in ink, but scratched into bone. You sit beside one of the newcomers as he sharpens a flint blade. His upper teeth are etched in long chevrons, like tiny waves or bird wings. You ask what they mean. Storm-blooded, he says simply. You want to ask more. But the way he says it, like a name, a memory, and a secret, all at once you don't. Instead, you offer him some dried fish. He accepts, biting down, hard. A loud crack follows. He grins again. Tooth still works. And that, too, is part of the ritual. These weren't decorations meant to be babied. Vikings used. Their teeth bit, tore, chewed through frozen meat and braided rope. Decoration didn't make them fragile. If anything, it made them more proud to survive it all intact. As the day rolls on, impromptu contests spring up. Who can carve the straightest line into driftwood? Who can name the village where the pattern of 3 stacked slashes originated? Who knows the story behind the hooked fang, a curved groove said to repel evil spirits during sea travel? A woman claims her father had sun teeth, grooves shaped like rays, only visible when he smiled wide at dawn. Another man has only one decorated tooth, a front, lower incisor marked with a black dot. My wife told me one was enough, he says with a shrug. It's all so human, so oddly familiar. We decorate what we value. We personalize what we carry. Some wear rings, some wear ink. The Vikings. They smiled their history. As the sun sets behind the mountains, the visitors prepare to depart. You help load crates onto the longships. And just before boarding, one of the merchants turns and flashes a toothy grin. You spot a fresh line, faint pink, not yet healed. He points to you. Northern Mark. He says, new story, and then he's gone. Or splashing dragon prow, lifting toward sea spray. You stand on the shore long after they vanish into mist, teeth chattering slightly, fingers to your lips, and for the first time you wonder what kind of mark you would wear. The moon is high and full tonight, casting a pale shimmer across the village rooftops. You sit alone by the longhouse hearth, the fire low, your thoughts flickering with the embers. The guests are gone, but the echoes of their smiles remain patterns etched into your memory. Someone settles beside you. It's the elder, the one with the nearly vanished grooves, so faint now they look like shadows of stories rather than the stories themselves. He clears his throat, not to speak, but to begin. There was a time, he murmurs, when a man's worth could be seen by how many marks he carried, not just on his arms, on his face, his teeth. You nod slowly. He continues, those who bore them were called mouth singers, because when they opened their mouths, you heard more than words. You heard everything they'd seen. You want to laugh, mouth singers, but the name sticks, feels right. He tells you of warriors who decorated their teeth after every voyage. One mark for surviving a storm, one for slaying a bear, one for losing a brother. The teeth weren't just ornaments, they were timelines. Historians still argue whether such personal narrative marking truly existed, or if it's a romantic modern idea projected backward, but oral tradition supports it. Stories of teeth as trophies, as diaries, as scars in miniature. You ask the elder if he remembers getting his. I was 16. Sat still for 2 hours. Didn't scream once. He chuckles. But I bit the carver. Another pause. Only once. The fire pops, sending a spark up into the smoke hole. You lean in. Why did it stop, you ask? The decoration. His smile fades slightly. It didn't stop, he says. It changed. He explains how, as Christianity spread, the decorated smile became suspect. Churchmen called it pagan demonic even. Some said it mocked the purity of the soul, that to carve what the gods had shaped was to insult them. Priests ordered the practice halted. Some tooth carvers fled. Others quietly buried their tools. A few converted and swore off filing forever. One even chiseled a cross into his own molar to show loyalty to the new god. Some kept marking, the elder says, but in secret, tiny dots on back teeth, hidden lines under the lip. Nothing anyone could see, unless you laughed too wide. He looks at you. We stopped smiling as much. You sit in silence. There's something unbearably sad about that. A culture folding its grin away, like a letter never sent. Later, you find yourself near the village archive. Just a box, really filled with odds and ends, broken beads, rusted nails, bits of carved bone. And at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, is a jawbone. Human. 3 teeth remain, each marked barely. You hold it carefully, light from the fire, catching the grooves, like whispers. You wonder who they were, what they saw, who they sang to with that mouth. You place it back gently. Back by the fire, the elder has dozed off. You leave him be. He's earned the rest. But in your own mouth, you run your tongue over your teeth, smooth unmarked. For now, The frost returns overnight, sharp and sudden glazing every surface in a thin shell of cold. You step outside early breath, coiling in the air to find the village unusually quiet. No hammering, no bleating goats, no children shouting. Just the creak of timber and the sound of snow shifting underfoot. Something's changed. You soon learn why a raid is coming, not from the village to it. Word arrived with a scout just before dawn. A rival clan from upriver, known more for theft than conversation, is making their way down the fjord. No blood has been drawn yet, but the signs are clear. The warriors are gathering. Shields are painted blades, honed, and the teeth bared. You stand near the edge of the longhouse as gear. The grin, fresh warrior checks the grooves in his teeth using a shard of obsidian. They still shine dark and defiant, but he doesn't smile now. He tests his jaw, opens, closes grimaces. These aren't for show. Today, you realize now, these marks were not made to intimidate across a dinner table. They were forged for war, for that flickering, uncertain moment when battle lines form and fear makes men hesitate. And there in the chaos, a grin gleams like a blade. Historians still argue whether Viking tooth decoration had tactical intent. Did it frighten enemies? Did it bind comrades? Some scholars suggest it was psychological warfare. Make yourself look inhuman, unafraid, marked by gods or madness. Others believe it was deeply internal, more about who you were than what they thought. Either way, it works. As the village braces for conflict, teeth flash like banners, grooved, painted, stained. Some add fresh soot to deepen the blackness. Others use red ochre, a tradition rarely seen, whispered to have once been used by berserkers who wanted to look like they had already bled. You help a boy tie a strip of fur over his shoulder. He looks up at you nervously. You ask if he's afraid. He shrugs a little, then he grins. 3 perfect lines cross his front teeth. Maybe they'll think I've done this before. He says, you ruffle his hair. The elder carver is there too. He doesn't fight anymore, but today he stands by the longhouse with a small pot of pigment and a brush. Warriors pass him one by one, not to sharpen their blades, but to mark their mouths. A line, a dot, a wave, symbols of courage or memory, or nothing at all but powerful, because they could mean everything. You watch as one man kneels to have his lone tooth. He lost the others in a different battle, streaked with black. When he stands, his crooked smile somehow looks whole. You find yourself wondering again, what is it about the human need to decorate what hurts most, to make meaning from pain, to declare, I chose this, I carry this. By midday, the scouts return. False alarm. The rival clan turned back. Maybe they weren't ready, or maybe they saw something. Maybe they saw the teeth. Relief settles over the village like falling ash. Slowly, life resumes its rhythm. Tools are packed away. Fires relit. Snow swept from doorways, but the paint stays. The marks remain. You see them differently now, not just as decoration, but as armor. The storm that rolls in that night is slow, heavy, and mean. You wake to the sound of wind pressing against the longhouse like a jealous ghost searching for cracks. Outside the world is a blur of white and cold. Inside the fire has been stoked high, the long shadows leaping along the rafters. People huddle under firs, whispering quietly voices, carrying the weary tones of stories told more for warmth than wisdom. But something crackles through the gloom. Laughter gear. Ever the grin-bearer is retelling the tale of how his brother once tried to file his own teeth after too much ale. using the jagged edge of a fishbone. It went about as well as you'd imagine. Blood, shouting a chipped molar, and a permanent slur in his speech. But the crowd loves it. They laugh, not just at the story, but at the memory of it, the pain, the mess, the boldness, and that somehow is the real point. You realize in that moment that Viking tooth decoration was not just performance or identity, it was legacy. A mark carved in enamel endures long after memory fades. Skin ages. Tattoos fade, scars smooth. But teeth hold their shape, their pattern, long after death. That's why archaeologists keep finding them. You remember what the elder said. Not all who carve are remembered, but maybe the grooves help historians still argue whether these decorations were meant for the living or the dead. Some believe they were a passport into the afterlife, a way for ancestors to recognize their own others. Suggest the marks were only ever meant for this world, tools for social navigation, intimidation, or simply self-expression. You glance across the room and catch a glimpse of a young woman staring into a bronze plate, tilting it to catch her reflection. She runs her finger across her teeth, checking a newly carved groove. She winces when she taps it still sore, but then she smiles, practicing how it looks. A man next to her notices and nods. Good shape, he says. She beams. And in that simple moment, centuries collapse. You see the timeless human urge to make our bodies speak through scars, ink paint, or a single line carved into a tooth. With a bone needle and patience, the storm howls louder. But the longhouse holds. Someone pulls out an old saga, reciting it in rhythmic sleepy tones. You only half listen. The rhythm is enough. But when a name is spoken, several people look toward a woman in the corner. She nods, showing a faint cross etched into one tooth. The mark of that name, that family, that line. The story continues. Outside snow gathers against the door. Inside, the fire crackles, the air thick with heat and quiet pride. You close your eyes, your jaw slackening your own teeth, smooth, but no longer blank. Because even if you don't bear the marks, you carry the stories, now, and maybe that's enough. Maybe one day, someone will speak of you. Dawn comes slowly. The storm has passed, leaving behind a world muffled in white, like the land itself is asleep. Ice clings to the window slits in the longhouse, but inside, the embers are still glowing, and a stew pot simmers gently its surface, steaming with a lazy rhythm. You rise quietly, careful not to wake the sleepers. Stepping over cloaks and curled-up dogs, you make your way to the fire. The same seat, the same warmth. But something feels final, because today you're leaving. You glance around the longhouse, one last time. Your eyes, pausing on faces you've come to know Gear, with his proud, darkened stripes. The elder woman, with her spiral smile. The young girl, still painting temporary lines each morning. The boy, with only one groove, always hoping for the next. You remember the trader from Russ's, the chieftain, with patterns said to be from Constantinople. The man, who carved symbols instead of lines. The woman, who filed her teeth before marriage. The elder, who showed you the tools and the care it took to hold a steady hand when shaking would break a smile forever. You've seen how the marks began with bravery and ended in memory. How they faded when priests raised crosses but never disappeared. How they moved across seas, changed shape, changed purpose, yet always remained personal. Historians still argue whether tooth decoration was widespread or rare, meaningful or mere vanity, but you know better now. You felt it how the air changed when someone smiled and showed their stories written in white and black and red. Before you go, you find a quiet spot near the entrance and kneel by a shallow stone bowl filled with soot and ash. There's a brush beside it, worn but usable. You dip it carefully and press it to your front teeth. One line, just one. It doesn't hurt. It won't last, but it's yours. And it says, I was here. I saw. I remember. As you walk through the frost-covered village, no one stops you. But a few nod. One grins. The boy, with the one groove, waves goodbye, with a mouthful of potential. You pass the burial ground, one last time. There under the snow lie the quiet ones, their teeth still holding the marks they chose. Grooves no storm could erase. And somewhere you think there's a smile in the dark, waiting to be found. And now, the hearth has gone quiet. The snow outside has thickened again, soft and slow, blanketing the village until every sound is hushed. You lie back on your straw mat, wrapped in a heavy fur, and let your breath fall into rhythm with the crackling of the last few coals. You can still see them, those smiles. Some fierce, some shy, some sharp as bone, others faded like old memories. They linger in the warmth behind your eyes, patterns etched in thought long after they left enamel behind. You've walked through a world where courage wasn't just shouted, it was carved. Where pain was not hidden, but shaped into something proud. Where even the smallest groove could whisper, I lived, I mattered, I chose. Let that thought settle over you, like the snow outside, gentle quiet grounding. And now your body softens, your breath slows, your jaw unclenches. There's no need to carry the stories tonight. They'll wait for you. Rest now, knowing that somewhere, in some forgotten grave near the sea, a tooth still gleams with the mark of a soul who dared to make their life visible. Not with ink, not with words, but with a smile. Good night, traveler. Sleep well.